Good evening. There's a old comic. There's an old cartoon where a gentleman who's tall and skinny and has thick glasses is being paraded around at a dinner party. And the host of the dinner party walks him up to one of her friends, and she says, "Hello, I'd like you to meet John. He's an economist, but he's really very interesting." And hopefully I'll be at least as interesting as the next most interesting economist that you happen to know tonight. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'd like to begin with just a couple of personal comments. One is that most economists tend to be fairly apolitical, and we like to focus on the things that are working and the things that are not working. In fact, one of the things that we do as part of our profession is we study all economic and human choice in action. And that includes choices of consumers, it includes choices of firms, it includes choices of moms and dads, and it includes the choices that politicians and lobbyists and bureaucrats also make. So because we study political behavior, we tend to we have sort of a distanced perspective on politics. And so you'd be hard pressed, even though economists often are thought to be political or right-wing or libertarian or Republicans. I tend to find in my hanging out with other economists that quite the opposite tends to be true, that we sort of resist these party affiliations and staunch policy lines because we really want to focus on the things that work. The other thing I'd like to say is, I'm first and foremost a Christian, and I happen to be a Christian who's been called to the study of economics. And one of the reasons that I've been called to it and that I'm really excited about the work that I do, and I'll talk more about this in the remarks this evening, is that the market order really is a gift of God, and it's part of his marvelous creation. And understanding it better is really helpful in all of the good work that we try to do, whether it's in our homes or in our churches, working with our neighbors, wherever we happen to be. Economic knowledge and economic information is useful, really useful, and it helps us serve better in whatever sense that means to us. That's a good place to begin. So these are comments that are organized largely around my book with Robin Clay, my dear sweet friend, who is salt and light among us in ways that I only aspire to be. And so I really appreciated Robin as a collaborator. So what I'd like to do tonight is connect my Christian faith to economic activity. And one of the things that's true about economics is often it doesn't give obvious answers to the problems that we face. But even if it doesn't give obvious answers, it can help us understand the question or the problem better. And with that better understanding, then we can begin to think about how to address those problems more directly and more effectively. So even though sometimes economics is referred to as a dismal science, because in any given moment there's only so much we can accomplish, Christian economists like me, we tend to be pretty hopeful. And we're hopeful because of our faith, and we're also hopeful because of the economics that we know and that we study. Christians are called to conduct every aspect of our lives in response to the call and grace of God in Christ. It's inescapable that once we become his, then we live our lives in response to his call. And like it or not, many, if not most dimensions of our lives today are inextricably woven with markets. When I think about just traveling here today from southern Arkansas, when I think of all the ways that I relied upon people who were working hard to serve me, even though they'd never met me, they don't really care about me personally, what they care about is doing good work and earning a living for their families and providing a better life for their children. Nevertheless, we're constantly interacting in markets, both with people that we know and increasingly in a global society. We have a nation with 310 million people, a planet now with about 7 billion people, and we're interacting with people with whom we may never meet, who nevertheless have an opportunity to serve us and serve us well. So given that we live in a growing society, and given that we have so many choices that we can make or choose not to make, then Christians seek to live their economic lives just like the rest of their lives, carefully and prayerfully, aware of their own limitations, and trusting God to bless and use their lives in ways that we probably can't fully imagine because, let's face it, God is omniscient and he knows. and we have a limited perspective from where we happen to be sitting today. Now, sin is pervasive, and we're painfully aware of our limits, but Christians are nevertheless called to a reasoned hope for themselves and for the world. That's right, I said it, a reasoned hope. And reflecting on economics, yes, even this dismal science can give great cause to us for hope. And the case I hope to make tonight is that this hope that we have as Christians and this hope that we have that economics brings to Christians who are working in the world, this hope is a reasonable hope. It's not magic. It's not fairy dust. It's not a pipe dream. This hope really is a reasonable hope. And the hope that it brings is the promise of even fuller human flourishing. Well, in the book, Robin and I make the argument that there are really three pillars of just flourishing. And James already described them well. They are good government, good markets, and good neighbors. Those are the three pillars of just flourishing. And in chapter 2 of our book, Robin likens these three pillars of just flourishing, not really to pillars so much as to legs on a camera tripod like those that we have here. You can't have a camera tripod that works well if one leg is 2 feet long and the other two are 6 feet long. It won't work very well, and the angle in the camera will be really, really slanted if that's the case. So you need balance among those. And the real danger is to let one of those pillars, whether it's government or the church or even markets, to sort of overreach into what is rightly the domain of another area. One of the things we struggle with today is perhaps I would argue, not perhaps, the overreach of government, doing some things, especially at a distanced level for millions of people and affecting millions of lives, when they don't have the particular information that's necessary to make a difference in the life of a given individual. There's this idea in Christian social thought, the Dutch reformers call it sphere sovereignty, and the Catholics call it subsidiarity. And the idea is a simple one, and the idea is that when there's a human need that needs addressing, then the best way to address it, the most effective way, is to do it at the lowest level that's capable of addressing that need. Now, why is that? Why is it important to address that human need at the lowest level that's capable? And again, I said capable of accomplishing that. One reason is when you're close, when you're addressing the needs of your neighbors or people in your town or your community or even your county, the local information is better. You understand exactly what the nature of the problem is and what the need is. And when you have that information, that's a powerful tool in being an agent of change in addressing that need. The other reason is that when you address a problem at the lowest level that's capable to address that need, then there's much better accountability. There's much better accountability. There's the potential to establish a relationship in addressing that human need in a way that's just impossible when you start to talk about a society of millions or even billions of people. So in the book, Robin and I argue that there are 5 basic principles for our economic lives as Christians. And if you're interested in the details, they're covered in chapter 2 of the book. And we pull out lots of scriptural examples that basically, when you read them together, make the argument for these 5 points. The first one is that we are called to be good stewards. We are created by God, and we have the responsibility of being stewards of all that we possess and of everything in his creation. And part of that responsibility means that we're supposed to enjoy creation and also to show gratitude for it. So principle 1, we have a calling and responsibility of stewardship. And a second principle, to enjoy creation and also to show gratitude for it. Third principle is that human beings have an obligation to work. We're created in the image of God. We're created in the imago Dei. It's exciting, isn't it? It's thrilling, isn't it? And part of the way that we experience that is through our creative work. And we are, just like he created the world, we have an opportunity to be co-creators alongside him in our work. So human beings have an obligation to work. Society has an inescapable mandate to provide for the poor. And finally, human beings are called not to just stay where they are, but to develop resources and to apply their talents, and especially to be on the lookout for opportunities to apply their unique talents in the unique situations in which they find themselves. I imagine if you think carefully about your own life, you can think of a moment when really you were the only person positioned in a given situation to address the need that was presented in front of you. And you don't really understand exactly how you got to that moment, but you find yourself in that moment, and you are the person best positioned to address that human need. So what I'd like to do a little bit is sing the praises of markets and the goods that they can do. Especially as a Christian and as an economist, it's something that I like to do a lot. In fact, when we were working on the book, I put together a hymn tune, or a hymn verse. You can sing it to the tune of For the Beauty of the Earth. I'll spare you that tonight. But there was this one morning that I was walking to my office, and I was so inspired when we were working on the book and so inspired by the beautiful autumn morning that I literally did, after about 10 minutes, that's how hard I worked on this thing. I put about 10 minutes in, and I came up with this hymn verse, and you can sing it to For the Beauty of the Earth. And in the first draft of the book, Robin tried to put it in, and the publisher said, that hymn verse has to go. So that's now a relic of the book writing process. But, you know, Christian economists really are excited about markets. And it goes back centuries. Scholastics like St. Thomas Aquinas and the scholars of the Salamanca School, the reason that they studied science and astronomy, biology, the reason they studied these things is because they wanted to understand the Creator better. And if they understood the creation better and his created order, then they felt like they gained better insight into the mind of the master designer himself. In fact, scientists like Kepler, when they were writing out their treatises about the laws of planetary motion, they were so inspired by what they were studying and understanding and how amazing and miraculous what they were learning was, that they spontaneously sometimes stood up and broke into song. Now, you would be hard-pressed, maybe with present company accepted, you'd be hard-pressed to find an economist, much less a Christian one, who in 2012 would be working at his desk one day and estimating an econometric model and just be so awe-inspired by the work that he's doing that he stands up and takes off his jacket in Hollywood musical style and breaks into song. But you know what? We really, really should. And there are good reasons to do so. So yes, economists, especially Christian ones, should break into their own psalms of praise. Markets work to meet human needs. They direct our human potential, and they serve human goals, and sometimes those goals are noble and marvelous, and sometimes those goals are pretty modest, and they're how we enjoy leisure time with our families and the way that we teach them. So as a Christian economist, I see markets as part of God's rich providence provided for all of us. And the amazing thing is that they coordinate billions of seemingly unrelated actions and unrelated decisions in the ways that bless many. So what then is this economics? And I have, 35 minutes, James? Is that about right? Okay, so what is economics in 10 minutes? A definition of economics I like, especially I teach a lot of introductory economics, and a lot of students arrive and they think, oh, it's about business or it's about pricing decisions. No, economics fundamentally is a social science, and it's about how human beings make choices, and it's choices of all kinds. What to have for dinner tonight? What school should I try to send my child to? How should I spend this evening in my leisure time? Economic choices are all kinds of choices, and the actions that follow from those choices, the consequences of those choices and actions, and those consequences, whether they're intended consequences or whether they are unintended consequences. So the art of economics lies in seeing the unintended consequences. Plenty of us have good ideas. I've had lots of ideas in my life that I thought seemed like a really good idea at the time. And then later on, I was reminded by the reality that sat in. I was reminded by friends and brothers and sisters in Christ who showed me otherwise. That, you know what, there really are unintended consequences. And every good idea isn't necessarily an idea that should be pursued. And so a quote I like is from Henry Hazlitt. He's a marvelous writer in the 1940s and 1950s, really understood his economics, marvelous communicator. And he's got this book, and the book is called Economics in One Lesson. And this is the lesson that Hazlitt tells. Hazlitt says that the art of economics consists in looking not merely at the immediate, but at the longer effects of any act or policy. It consists in tracing the consequences of that policy not merely for one group, but for all groups. So what Hazlitt says here is a little unsettling. And what he's saying is we should resist the temptation to say, oh, here's a terrible situation, something must be done. And then have our response be, oh, well, here's something, let's do it. Because it's difficult to understand at the front end, even if you're very, very smart, and even if your heart is in exactly the right place. Selfless toward others, or full of love toward others, and utterly selfless toward yourself. It's almost impossible to understand how things are going to turn out. And so the task of economics then lies in doing my level best of anticipating the unintended consequences of some policy choice or action or family decision or even a choice that you make in your church. So if the art of economics lies in seeing the unintended consequences, then the task of economics lies in communicating them effectively to others. And this is a difficult thing to do, especially when those others may care as deeply and as passionately about doing good work as you do. So communicating economic truths but doing it in love is a difficult thing to do because sometimes economists can sound like they don't care and they're not loving in a given situation, when quite the opposite is the truth. Caring for the poor is too serious a business to do badly. I'll repeat that. Caring for the poor is too serious a business to do badly, especially since when we care for the poor, we care for our master. So a quote I like is from an Austrian economist named Friedrich Hayek. And the quote's gotten very popular because of an internet video. You can Google this on YouTube. Some of you have probably seen it. But the quote is this. It says that the curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design. I'll repeat that. The curious task of economics isn't to say, here are all the great things that we can do, let's start. The curious task of economics is to speak a cautionary note. The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to people how little they really know about what they think they can do. So this art of seeing the unseen, what does that mean for the Christian economist? Well, one thing that's marvelous and unseen is the work that the price system does. Prices constantly send signals to human beings about what to do more of and what to do less of in service to their fellow human beings. In this way, the market system is remarkable, and it coordinates millions, if not billions, of daily choices and actions among all of us. And so the price system, when prices go up, it sends a signal to us, and the signal sends, oh, this is something that I should do more of. My fellow human beings need this. They have work that they want to accomplish, whether it's at their work or their church or their school or at their household. The price is rising. I should get to work serving my fellow man doing this thing. Also, if only by proximity, the individual is in the best position to choose, using both, and these are crucial points, using both reason and the will, what is best for him or her. Because nobody has a greater grasp of your hopes, your dreams, your desires, and the longings of your heart than you yourself do. Let me ask this tonight. How many of you have received a gift from the person who professes to love you most and know you best? Show of hands. Sometime in your life, you've received a gift from the person who professes to love you most and know you best. Now, I won't ask for hands on this next question. Have you always been thrilled with the gift that you've received? Has it always been exactly what you wanted, and this person knows the longings of your heart and your desires and tastes and preferences as well as you do? And, as much as it pains me to say it, and this is off the record, by the way, because I have a family to go home to. Yes, sometimes I've received gifts that were not the perfect thing. And the reason is that, try as they might, even the people who love me the most and know me the best sometimes don't know exactly what I need or what I want at any given moment. So because at any given moment we have limited resources, society has to make choices. We can't accomplish every good thing that we'd like to do at any given moment, whether it's individually as a society or as a society. So is it possible that when I'm out living my life and trying to have a better day than the one I had yesterday, trying to give my kids better lives than the ones that I had and certainly better than my parents had, is it possible that those individual decisions can somehow lead ultimately to the good of others? Well, Adam Smith was the first modern economist to try to explain the power of these relative prices, to signal which goods we should make more of and which goods and services we should make fewer of. And he did this in his 1776 book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And even though this book is remembered for a couple of things, invisible hand, pin factory example, what it should be remembered for is the last three words of the title. What Adam Smith genuinely wanted to understand is, what is it that makes poor people not poor anymore? What is it that grows ultimately the wealth of nations? Now, there's a lot in Smith's book about self-interest, and I'd like to just clarify what Smith said and did not say in The Wealth of Nations. A lot of people who haven't read Smith carefully think that, well, Smith said, go out and pursue your own self-interest, do it as selfishly as you like, and you know what? Things will turn out great for humanity. And that's not really the argument that Smith made. The point that Smith was trying to make is, if I have work that I need to do, and you have a pencil, and that pencil would help me write letters, it would help me do the things that I need to do, then I have some options to try to get that pencil. One is I could beat you up and steal it. But society doesn't work very well when that happens. It also doesn't create you as someone created in the image of God, and that's not appropriate. So that's one alternative, but that's probably not a good alternative. There are other ways that I could try to get that pencil from you. I could use forms of coercion. I could try lots of different not very nice things. One thing I could try is I could try begging that pencil from you, but that doesn't really respect my dignity as a human being created in the image of God. So Smith said that when somebody else has a pencil that you want, what you should do is you should steal a page from Tom Sawyer and Whitewashing the Fence and say, you know what? I see you have a pencil there. I could really use that pencil. Here's why you should let me have it. And I'll reward you because I'm so thankful to have that pencil. So there was this possibility for mutually beneficial exchange. I'm so grateful to have the pencil that I reward you in exchange for giving that pencil to me. So Smith suggested that we would go hungry indeed if we had to rely on the goodness and the good intentions of others for our bread. Smith said instead, and this is a quote, he said that we address ourselves to the self-interest of others, and we persuade other people to work in our service, showing them that it's also in their interest as well to serve us in this way. Now, Smith's description of the price system that you find in The Wealth of Nations, it wasn't a complete description, but it's remembered best probably, and rightly so, for its invisible hand metaphor. And this is where Smith takes that interaction with the pencil and he turns it global. And he says, you know what? There are millions of people serving you daily, making pencils, mining the metal for the ferrule on the pencil, and mining the graphite, and mining the clay that bonds to the graphite to make the center of the pencil, make the core of the pencil, and cutting the timber and killing the timber, K-I-L-N, and figuring out how to assemble that six-sided object so that we can all benefit from the use of those pencils. And the miracle is you don't have to call up and order a pencil. These spontaneous interactions happen so that a pencil is delivered to you. And this pencil, does it cost millions of dollars? Why no, it costs 5 cents, 4 cents. If you go to the dollar store like I do, you might get it for as little as 2 cents in a big package of pencils. And the social good is unambiguously improved. One way to look at this is to go to the data. And here's a diagram that I like. A couple of cultural anthropologists and economic historians used the best available data. And they tried to plot a time series diagram of GDP per person. And this is GDP per person for the planet. It goes back to the dawn of human history and extends forward to the year 2000. And so you have the series of time, the time frame on the horizontal axis. And on the vertical axis, what you see is global income divided by the global number of mouths to feed. It's also adjusted for inflation, so these dollars are adjusted to be what a dollar was worth in the year 2005. For most of human history, life really was nasty, brutish, and short. And most of us lived, on average, on about $100 at $2,005, $100 per year. So this is real GDP per person per year. But something miraculously starts to happen around the period of the Industrial Revolution. And what starts to happen is human beings, not everywhere, not at the same time, but human beings begin to grow rich. Now, are rich is a good thing? Not necessarily, but is the polio vaccine a good thing? Is penicillin a good thing? Are opportunities to think about your vocation and your calling and career and things that you can study in college, are these good things? Yes, these are unambiguously good things. And with no one really deciding to create this additional wealth, nobody made it a government project. There wasn't a stimulus package to make this hand, but man, that's some stimulus. Those are some results. Well, what did Smith's successors contribute? In short, they contributed three things to round out his theory of the price system. One is this idea of mutual determination. And it says that, the price you pay for a particular good or a service, or how hard it is for you to accomplish something in the service of others, it doesn't depend on you alone. It depends on everyone else acting at the same time as you. And a great analogy here is how long driving takes. When it takes longer than usual to get where you want to go, church, school, work, is it because you're driving slowly? No, no, no. It's because other people are on the road and they're making it go more slowly than it usually does. And the same thing is true in a price system. When the price of a good rises for you, it's because market forces are guiding that price to be higher than it used to be. So there's this simultaneous mutual determination of what a price is and how many goods and services are produced by both the suppliers and potential suppliers, as well as the buyers and the potential buyers. Another critical piece that was contributed later is the idea of subjective value. Economists like Karl Marx really thought that the value of a good lay in the cost of its production. And we know that that's not entirely the story. True, the costs of production matter, and a firm won't produce a good or a service unless you cover its costs. But what also matters tremendously is how valuable you and I perceive that work to be. If we think something is valuable, we are willing to generously reward those who serve us in giving us that valuable thing. But if we think something is silly, then those are the products that fall by the wayside. Those are the businesses that go out of business. So mutual determination, subjective value, and then finally marginal analysis. The final piece was that all individual human decision making, we don't make it in big chunks. We make it in the smallest units possible. Whether we go through this mental calculus or not, we are constantly deciding, should I volunteer to work another hour at work if I'm offered it? Should I decide to be a part-time stay-at-home parent or a full-time stay-at-home parent? And all of the decisions we make, normally they're not life-changing, life-altering, big things. They're, how many oranges should I buy this week? 3 or 4 when I go to the grocery store? So this marginal analysis was the final piece. Well, let me wind to a conclusion. Markets are a part of God's rich providence. And here's a quote that I like. This is from my co-author Robin Clay and a former colleague of ours, John Lunn. And they write in an article that appeared in Christian Scholars Review. They write this: just as God-given productivity of the soil, combined with human labor and ingenuity, blesses societies with abundant crops, so also does the productivity of gifted human beings bless all humanity through markets. The somewhat mysterious way in which markets accomplish this without any one person directing it suggests to us the providential hand of God at work. On the same theme, in a book called Calvin and Commerce that was published in 2009, Hull and Burton write these words: God's providence is present in all events. We need to learn to see his invisible hand working in all things. He is truly sovereign over all of history. To doubt that is to reject God's lordship. Such repudiation is not merely based on an absence of information, it is also a rebellion of the heart against one's creator. Happy is the person who learns to see God's hand in all of life. I'll conclude with 9 big ideas from economics. And these are the 9 things that if I could tell anybody for 5 minutes what I've learned as an economist, these are the things. The first one is that for everything you choose to do, there's something that you are not doing. I was reminded of this during a student presentation Wednesday at school, and he was telling us about how the TSA, the Transportation Safety Authority, works. And he talked about the reduction in the risk of terrorist activity. He talked about how few events there have been, how basically made a case for the TSA. And at the end of the presentation, which was a great presentation, the question that I asked is, okay, I'm an economist, has it been worth it? And I don't even mean the billions of dollars that we've spent on full body scanners. My question is, every TSA agent is created in the image of God to do creative work. They are normally bright, energetic, polite, helpful people. If you've had experiences to the contrary, I'm sorry. But they really are, and here's the question. If they're working full-time at the TSA, every one of those human beings is working 2,000 hours per year, providing slightly safer air travel. And the question that I must ask as a Christian economist is, yes, but at what cost? What work could those human beings created in God's image, what creative work could they be doing instead? Again, another of the 9 big ideas is one we've talked about already. There are unintended consequences. There's the seen and the unseen. A third theme is that actions speak louder than words. The New Testament tells us that we need to live lives that are consistent with what we prize most highly. Economists believe this too. We call it revealed preference. And if somebody says that Christ is important, then they should be spending time in Scripture and in prayer. And if they're not doing those things, well, then maybe those aren't important to him or her as that person says. Another that we've touched on already, markets do constantly transform and renew resources from less valuable uses to more valuable ones. A fifth one that echoes the first one is that job creation is rightly viewed as a cost of any initiative. Again, human beings are precious. Human beings are our nation's and our community's most valuable resources. And when we create jobs just to keep those people busy, that's not helping them succeed in a way that preserves their dignity as human beings. The remaining points: free trade helps reduce poverty. It's unambiguously clear. One that I have to remind my students of constantly is that hope for tomorrow can sometimes require temporary discomfort today. There are parts of the country that are remaking themselves. I'm a kid who grew up in western Pennsylvania, and I watched the steel mills and the coal mines fall apart. But is western Pennsylvania flourishing today? Relatively speaking and relative to the rest of the country, yes, it is. And sometimes there are heart-wrenching, life-wrenching episodes that have to happen in order for the promise of the new day to be made reality. Bad government is not good for the poor. And then finally, the final point, this is a big one for me personally, sunk costs are sunk. What this means for the economist is that it doesn't matter what's happened in the past, we have expressions for sunk costs or sunk in our everyday language. We say that there's no use crying over spilled milk, or there's no use throwing good money after bad. And it really matters a lot when you're thinking about economic policy. Too often governments, too often NGOs have been doing work so long that they have such an investment in that it's hard to take a step back and ask, should we continue to do this? And it's very, very difficult to do that. But we need to do that. We need to do it in our economic lives, and we're called to do it in our spiritual lives as well. It doesn't matter what your life has been like up to this point. The question is, how today can we each begin to live our lives anew, listening to his call and reading from his love letter to us and trying to live our lives in accordance with his will. Thank you very much. Do we have a moment for questions? I guess we have a moment or two for questions or comments, which I'll be happy to entertain. Yes?
Well, what was the TSA's answer?
Well, remember, it was a student presentation. And we didn't really get into the details. One of the things we started to talk about, though, is, well, the students started to make an argument, and it's a tough thing to be a professor because you want to challenge a student, but you don't want to belittle a student, right? And so that's the tension. So I was just sort of trying to help him think a little bit further in the way that an economist would. And his question is, well, we've had fewer incidents, so we're saving lives, and that's unambiguously a good thing. And my response as a cold-hearted economist is, well, a cold-hearted, how about hard-headed, warm-hearted economist, how's that? Well, way more people die on our nation's highways than they do in our nation's skies. So if all we really cared about is saving lives, then we should just outlaw driving altogether, and it would be a win for everybody. But as a society, we've made a calculation, and we've decided there's a trade-off, and the trade-off is one that we're willing to make. And we're willing to incur a little risk when we get behind the wheel, not just because of our own driving, but often because of the driving of all those other people around us. But we've decided that that's a risk that we're willing to take because of the good that can be accomplished in exchange. And so, we really sort of left the discussion there, and I didn't really press on this because A, we were short on time, there were other students presenting, and B, I sort of wanted to challenge him on the point and get him to think about the resource use and the opportunity cost without sort of being in his face too much. Thanks. Or other questions? Yeah.
As it relates to charitable initiatives, is there a common big miss that seems to permeate the things that our society is doing, whether it's governmental, whether it's local, whether it's religious or just a social outreach? Is there a common thread that kind of runs through that sticks out more than others?
Yeah, I think the common thread is what a really good friend of mine refers to as the great mind fallacy, and I casually referred to it, but it's this idea that if we're smart enough and we study enough economics and we spend enough time on the ground, whether it's in sub-Saharan Africa or wherever we go, if we're good enough and we're smart enough to make a difference. And it doesn't matter how many millions of dollars we put into direct aid to Africa so far, this is going to be the time. This is the moment that it's all going to turn around. And really smart people with really good hearts just can't accomplish what some basic things that James referred to can. Rule of law, basic human rights and human dignity, free markets, a stable currency. One of the things that's crippling Zimbabwe right now is that the country's worthless. I've got this $1 trillion bill that I take to my macroeconomics class. It's from Zimbabwe, but it really is a $1 trillion bill. And my students look at it and they think this is quite curious. And then I say, yeah, but it's just a worthless piece of paper. And they say, really? And I say, yeah, the reason they've had to print it's $100 trillion, even better. $100 trillion bills is because the government is corrupt. They've printed lots and lots of money to pay their bills. And so their money's as worthless as the mark was in Germany when they had to make their payments after the war. So I think that's the overarching theme. And it's true for parents too. Parents do their level best, but we all learn from our mistakes. our children don't respond to the incentives we've provided, and sometimes they really stun us in the ways that they respond to the incentive structure that we've created, and we learn from those mistakes. But at least we have a better shot as parents because we can see exactly what's happening, we can get better information, we can learn from our mistakes, and we can have an open conversation with our kids about why things are this way and not some other way. So yeah, that great mind fallacy, I think, is what gets in the way of lots of, well, government and all the way down to parents, I think, sometimes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there others? And I'll trust you to stand up when we need to move on.
Well, I've got a question.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if somebody who's homeless or poor and well, just somebody who's on welfare, and they said, why shouldn't I be, from an economic standpoint, what would be like your nutshell? Give us an elevator speech. Give us kind of a jump start on how do we educate the folks in our community about that from an economic standpoint.
So my 20-second response, my elevator speech, eh? One piece of it is certainly the role of moral and cultural institutions. I mean, your video was fascinating. Was it Daniel?
Dennis.
Oh, Dennis. To see this realization and appreciation that this really is something that's turned into a scam. It's not having the effects that it's designed to have. Sort of getting out of the daycare center debacle. I mean, just choosing to get out of that. Moral and cultural institutions matter a lot. The church has a role to play. The church has a role in educating the family and helping parents be better parents. Cycles of dependency are created when we allow that mindset to creep in and erode values that could be there otherwise. So the role of moral and cultural institutions is incredible. The other part of your question that's, I think, the tougher part is, I understand that. I mean, I understand it when you've got two avenues, and one's an easier one and one is a harder one. Man, in the trenches, choosing the easier one sometimes seems like the right choice. And that's where having a better incentive structure matters a lot. I mean, I'm not going to fault somebody who would make a choice that I might make if I were in exactly the same situation. What I would criticize as a Christian economist is the incentives. I mean, why do we have a warped incentive structure that tempts people into making these choices that really just aren't the right choices to be making? So teaching the individual to make wise choices, and then also creating a system where we don't have these perverse incentives, I think those are both pieces of the puzzle.
Well, how does the issuing of food stamps in a local economy, how does that affect the economy? Is it a good thing, bad thing, what? Does it do more good, or, I mean, talking about from dollar standpoint?
Is this a question you want to field, James?
Well, I think it's a great question, but I think it's an economics question. I mean, it's something that I've often thought about myself because, look at, well, let's just say that I've filled out a grant request for our mission from a very large chain that serves a lot of groceries, and there's a question in there: will you send them to the food stamp office? So there's some perverse incentive happening there because it affects economics from the side of the grocery store chain. They're benefiting, which so your question is very good. I think is it a positive thing or not a positive thing?
So
we see it negative.
Well, or how
from
would
a
it be if they weren't any? Would that affect the economy? Let's go to the other extreme. No food stamp. Okay, would that affect the local economy?
Good question. I
yeah.
don't know.
So I think the short answer here is what isn't a good idea is a large, bloated federal food stamp program. It can't possibly serve people well. Where is that money going, and why has it risen the way that it has, as we saw in the data? Those are the kinds of things that you can't understand if you're trying to manage a society of 310 million people. So again, I'm back to this idea of sphere sovereignty or subsidiarity, that the way to address those needs and the way to address hunger in our community is to address that at the most local level that's capable of addressing that need, because then we can understand better how to serve others, and we can understand better why it is that somebody does need food stamps in the first place. I mean, food stamps are a Band-Aid. They don't address the fundamental problem of poverty. Thank you.